Welcome to the Bearcat Den with President Taylor. I'm Dr. Ivy Taylor, your host and president of Rusk College. For today's show, we have a very special guest, Dr. Jessie Edward, who is the former mayor of Coldwater, Mississippi, and is currently president of the Mississippi Industrial College Alumni Association. Welcome, Dr. Edwards.
Good morning to you. Glad to be here.
Yes, yes. This summer, we had a chance to see you when we hosted Senator Roger Wicker here. We had an event out at the MI campus in front of the Carnegie building, and so you had some wonderful, poignant words and reflections about your time at MI College. Why don't we start, for those viewers who are not familiar with MI College, for some folks they've been driving by it for years as just a series of vacant buildings. Tell us a little bit about Mississippi Industrial College and about your time there as a student.
Well, Mississippi Industrial College was founded by Bishop Elias Cottrell, who was the seventh bishop of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, and was chartered as Mississippi Industrial, even though I think it was founded as Mississippi Theological and Industrial College.
Okay.
And of course, it closed in 1982 after, I want to say, 77 years. So basically it's been closed about 40 years. So you have maybe 2 or 3 generations, 4 or 5 generations of people who are local here at Holly Springs, and of course attended Rusk College, who came through when the school, after the school closed. I came to Mississippi Industrial College in the fall of 1971 as a young man who had just left the sandy loam soil of the Boone plantation. In other words, my family were farmers. But at Mississippi Industrial, I was in a much better place than I left. And I found teachers there to be very instructive, kind, and caring. And I oftentimes say that most people are accustomed to the character Superman, that had an S on his chest, which stood for Superman. Well, I had maybe the word N on my chest, which stood for no way this kid's gonna make it. Okay. But at Mississippi Industrial College, I learned how to learn. And in comparison to today's time, maybe I was safe there. And I majored in biology at Mississippi Industrial under one of the finest biology teachers this side of heaven, the late W. Hastings Carter. So I majored in biology there. We had great times there in association, I have to say, with Rusk College. I also say it's kind of amazing how many guys from Mississippi Industrial College who graduated there married girls from Rusk College, so, and vice versa. So we had wonderful times at Mississippi Industrial. And I mentioned I learned how to learn. It never occurred to me as a high school student, even though we had some brilliant students in high school, as you would know. Of course, I was not necessarily one of them, but the message even to a student today would be to start early in applying yourself toward learning. So the application of applying myself I came into maybe like in my sophomore year at Mississippi Industrial, when I discovered all these possibilities, all these things you could probably venture into if you get a good education. So it was a wonderful time there. It was a safe time there. I was molded and matured there, and I left Mississippi Industrial College inspired and motivated to be all I could be.
Well, Holly Springs must have been quite a vibrant place with those 2 colleges being active and full of students and full of faculty.
Well, indeed it was, because if you were an engaged student, you didn't have time to venture out into the city, so your whole universe was the MI campus or the Rusk campus. And we shared activities, we shared, activities. For example, on the Rusk campus, they had let's say a dance, student body dance, something like that, a social they call it back then,
Okay.
every Friday night. And at MI, we had the social like every Saturday night, or vice versa. So the students from Russ would come to MI, and the students from MI would come to Russ. And unless you just knew, you really didn't know where the person was in the school. And actually, oftentimes when I'm traveling, go places, many people come up to me and say, "Yeah, I remember you attended Russ." Well, you were there when I was there. And I correct them, you know. But yes, it was great times.
Well, talk to us about what happened. Why did MI close? I'm not asking you to be the authority, but I think you've done a little bit of research and have some ideas about what actually happened.
Well, I think kind of contrary to what we hear today is that it had something to do with integration and students going to junior colleges. I think it had nothing to do with that. Mississippi Industrial College had lost accreditation. So if I had to make a statement as to why it closed as a secondary source, I would say it had to do with the loss of accreditation, which basically means when you lose accreditation, you lose access to federal funds. And like many black colleges, and most even at that time, I would almost say 80% of your funding came from federal sources. So I would say Mississippi Industrial College closed, well, by a vote of the Board of Trustees, which had to do with the loss of accreditation.
Okay, okay. And I think I read that that went back to audits not being done properly.
I think it had to do with failure to meet fiscal requirements of the SACs, which had to do with auditing or failure to submit auditing for certain various years.
Yeah, so obviously that's an important area for all colleges to be diligent even today. So what do you recall about the time when it closed? How did recent graduates, you had only graduated probably less than about 10 years prior? Or?
I had been out of school 7 years.
Okay.
I think the idea of MI College closing was kind of devastating to people. I'm going to almost say then and now. I'm going to say people really never recovered from the news that it was not going to open. I don't actually recall hearing a formal announcement that it was closed, but more so that it hadn't opened.
Okay.
And I think the expectation was even 6 months to a year later that it would eventually reopen, but it never occurred. So I think people were devastated by that, and some even to this day, in some sense.
In some of my recent readings, I've come across unexpectedly hearing about people who attended Mississippi Industrial College. I was reading a memoir from Charlie Nelms, who was previously president of North Carolina Central, as well as president of a couple of PWIs, and he says he was inspired. He was from the Arkansas Delta, grew up on a farm, and said that he was inspired to pursue his education by his older brother, who was a graduate of Mississippi Industrial College.
Yes. One of the reasons MI, I'm going to say, was a popular institution because of the enthusiasm maybe of its founder. And at the time, this school was largely supported by the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. And Bishop Cottrell presided in Mississippi, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and as a presiding bishop, he had a lot of influence over would-be students and brought a lot of students to Mississippi Industrial from various states like Arkansas and Oklahoma. Not trying to say he was in all those states at the same quadrennial, but in different quadrennials he was assigned to different places. So therefore, there were many students that graduated from MI, from Alabama, Florida, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, just all over. And then, of course, there was the CME connection, and there being CME churches based all over the South and the Southeast, and that drew a lot of students who were CME to the institution.
And for some time, the CME Church still owned the buildings, correct?
Yes, the CME Church owned that property up until 2008, as you know, when it was sold to Russ College.
Yes,
So,
yes.
so Russ College is the benefactor of the Mississippi Industrial College.
Fortunate that there was not an effort to merge prior to a closure. You know, I used to be on the board of Houston Tillotson University, which was a result of the merger of Samuel Houston University and Tillotson University in Austin, Texas.
I think there was an effort to merge the schools back in the 60s. Of course, that's before my time, but my understanding is that part of the merger was that they kind of looked at who had the most challenging, let's just say, courses. And say, for example, just an example, Russ had the best, maybe say, science courses or departments or social studies. So all the kids took social studies and science at Russ. If MI had the best physical education or elementary education, then all the kids took those courses at MI. So that was part of the merger. So there are many Russ College graduates who tell you in a heartbeat, I took classes at Mississippi Industrial and vice versa.
Yeah.
So it was always a close working relationship. Even when I was a student, Russ had its student body meetings on the Mississippi Industrial College campus at Carnegie Hall.
Amazing, amazing
and
history.
that's amazing. And
Well, I look forward to hearing a little more about you preserving that history when we get back from the break. But we're going to take a brief break. Please stay tuned to the discussion. We'll be back in a moment, but in the meantime, enjoy a selection by the world-renowned Russ College a cappella choir under the direction of Dr. Arlandra Harvey.
If ye love me, keep my commandments, and I will pray the Father, and He shall give you another comforter, that He may abide with you forever, that He may abide with you forever, in the spirits of truth, the spirits of truth, in the spirits of truth, the spirits of truth, the spirits of truth, that He may abide with you forever, that He may abide with you forever, in the spirits of truth, the spirits of truth, in the spirits of truth, the spirits of truth, the spirit of truth.
Welcome back to the Bearcat Den with President Taylor. I'm Dr. Ivy Taylor, your host. For today's show, we're having a conversation with Dr. Jessie Edwards, President of the Mississippi Industrial College Alumni Association. So Dr. Edwards, you've been telling us about what a vibrant campus MI was and some of the reasons for its closure. So tell us about the organization that you lead that's committed to kind of continuing on the legacy of Mississippi Industrial College.
Well, after the closure of MI, in fact, 18 years after, we got some alumni together, came together and organized the Mississippi Industrial College Alumni Association Incorporated. And so we chartered ourselves, got tax-exempt status, so we're a nonprofit organization. But part of that charter says that we are to work to save the history, heritage, and architectural significance of the campus, and that we have endeavored to do as alumni. And of course, in the tradition of the closeness of the two campuses, we began to work very closely with the former administrator here, President Dr. Beckley. And one of our latest projects, of course, is to establish a museum in what was known as the President's Home. And we want to thank Dr. Beckley for entering into an agreement with us to allow us to be able to do that on that campus. By the way, the campus looks so beautiful, both campuses. I don't know who cuts the grass, but he must have some kind of special equipment.
Yes, both campuses are quite green and lush, but the MI campus certainly has more architectural grandeur than the Rusk College campus does, and we definitely want to be part of preserving that. Do you know how the campus came to be, the majority of the campus came to be on the National Register for Historic Places?
Well, first let me say this. We also want to thank you for your work in recognizing that this need to be done for the sake of history and preserving the architectural grandeur and significance of those buildings. I think in the 1970s, around 1976, the administration applied to the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, and the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, of course, had the sanction or ability to put that campus on the National Register because of its significant architecturally and otherwise.
For those who have interest in that particular aspect of the school's history, I think it's quite notable that Carnegie Auditorium was designed by McKissick & McKissick, which is a black-owned architectural firm that is still in existence 100 years later. Carnegie, I think, was built in 1920 or thereabouts.
Yep, thereabouts, yeah.
And the firm is still in existence. And I actually placed a call to one of the McKissicks to let them know that we are trying to bring the building back so that additional generations can enjoy musical performances, lectures, and make memories in that great hall.
Yes. You know, it's kind of noteworthy that in that day, 1900, 1800s, the kind of work people were doing in education, basically without federal aid. I mean, people were just soliciting people to donate $1, $5, $10, and the kinds of things that they were able to come up with, such as Carnegie Hall. And again, we want to thank the Rusk College and its president for doing such an outstanding job in pursuing funds to restore those buildings to its once former grandeur.
Well, I certainly appreciate my predecessor having the vision to purchase the campus to save it, and his working with the MI Alumni Club, because you all are invited back to various activities along with the Rusk College alumni as well.
Yeah. Well, one of the big days in Rusk College lore and is Founders Day. And I don't think there's any day any more important other than maybe graduation than Founders Day, because if it were not for the founders, there would be no today. So that's a day that no doubt should be recognized and elevated to its highest. And by the way, I certainly enjoyed the last Founders Day speaker. She, as they say colloquially, she tore down the house. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. She was amazing. So we're looking forward to this Founders Day, and we're making some progress on securing some funds to help us stabilize the buildings. We certainly don't have enough money yet to fix the buildings where we'll be able to occupy them yet. But my goal is to ensure that we don't lose the opportunity to be able to occupy them again. And if we let the elements continue to get to them, we will lose that opportunity.
Yeah, well, that's correct. And of course, I want to say just a word about Washington Hall, which was, I think you all planned to have a interpretive center, Ida B.
Yes.
Wells Interpretive Center.
Yes.
But I think it's lost on people that Booker T. Washington and Elias Cottrell were good friends.
Oh, okay.
And that's why that building is named
Okay.
in honor of Booker T. Washington. It's also lost on people. When you say Booker T. Washington, you hear a lot of criticism and all that. But we have to recognize that Booker T. Washington came along in a totally different era.
Yes, yes.
And if he hadn't ran the streets talking about civil rights, he probably wouldn't have lived very long. So I think he did the best that he could do in the circumstances that he came along in that time period.
Yes.
And also I want to point out that he started a business, it's gotten away from me exactly what it was, but it was a business cooperative in every southern state. And Elias Cottrell was the treasurer in Mississippi. And Booker T. Washington visited Russ College in 1908 and 1908. He had a speaking engagement here as he toured the South. And he spoke at Russ College that morning, 10 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
Had lunch at Bishop Cottrell's home, and spoke at Mississippi Industrial that afternoon. Now, I think what's lost on people is Booker T. Washington was, by today's standards, was synonymous with being the president of black people, if I could say that. He was kind of like
The most notable
the
black
most
leader.
notable black person in America. So whatever he said, people acquiesced and tried to do it. And many of the things he said was buy you some land, save you some money, establish yourself as an American citizen.
Things that are still relevant for us
Things that are
today.
still relevant today. Yes.
That's such amazing and poignant history. So as we move towards conclusion, just tell us about your vision for the Alumni Association and what you'd love to see happen at the campus.
Well, of course, we would love to see the entire campus revitalized and used purpose. And of course, with our project, the museum, there is much history as it relates to Mississippi Industrial. I want to point out just a couple of things. There was an individual whose name eludes me that became a Negro League baseball owner who graduated at Mississippi Industrial. That's something people don't realize. He owned the Kansas City Monarchs. The Kansas City Monarchs had Satchel Paige, Hank Aaron. So he owned that team that had all those great players on it. And he was a Mississippi Industrial College graduate, 1933. And there was another young man, I say young, he's not young today, but he led the nation in scoring in basketball, Earl Glass. He averaged 42.9 per game, and there was no three-point line. So, so that's an amazing thing. So it's that kind of history that we want to preserve and display, and want people to know what a great contribution Mississippi Industrial College has made to Holly Springs, Marshall County, the state of Mississippi, the Mid-South and the South, and the United States, because our graduates are everywhere, California, Florida, everywhere.
Okay. What amazing, amazing history that's certainly worthy of being preserved. I'm certainly looking forward to continuing to be a partner with you and your Alumni Association to tell those stories, to share those stories, and to raise the funds that we need in order to be able to put those buildings back to good use. Wouldn't it be great to attend one more show over at Carnegie Hall?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so very much for having me here today.
Okay, thank you. That's it for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.